And let's see how people are supporting group work. So these are some of the ways I thought of. You could write instructions for group work. You could provide materials to your student groups on communication in working in groups or organization working in groups. You could use, have an actual workshop where you focus on those topics of group communication or organization. You may also decide to form student groups intentionally, so just not randomly, but actually put some thought into which students are working together. You may also provide support from student tutors, or you yourself as a teacher may be providing support to student groups, or you could use rubrics for group assignments or other forms of group assessment. And there might be other ways of scaffolding group assignments or even other ways. So I see lots of instructions. We definitely like to use instructions. But some of the other ways we see teachers engaging and supporting group work are teacher and student support, and followed up by materials for group communication and organization. I'm really excited to see that, as well as rubrics for group assessment, and after that, forming groups intentionally and scaffolding group assignments as well. So that's exciting to see that there's lots of ways that we're already supporting group work. So we'll check back in with that in a moment. So if you haven't entered your responses yet, you're still invited to do so. But I'll return to my slides now. And the question is, what are learning communities? And again, this is probably something you're already using to some extent in your classroom, but this is about intentionally trying to support students working collaboratively or collectively. If working together is one of our goals or one of our outcomes that we hope for students, how can we best support that? And the definition of learning communities is pretty broad. This is a term that is used a lot in the United States. And the best definition that I've found that seems to capture all the different activities that are grouped under learning communities is this one here. It's an intentionally developed community that exists to promote and maximize individual and shared learning of its members. There's ongoing interaction, interplay, and collaboration among the members as they strive for specified common learning goals. So it's a group of people who has a common learning goal and they're interacting with each other. This takes different forms. So learning communities in the US are often part of a first-year experience, and this sometimes looks like one group of students is taking several courses, perhaps in different departments or courses that are explicitly interdisciplinary. And the idea is that by the same group of students taking multiple courses together, they are able to draw connections across those courses, think about how their previous knowledge informs the information that they're learning now, and draw connections to their broader field of knowledge and their other parts of their lives even. And as well as forming social bonds and socializing each other into the university experience. In the US, this also sometimes takes the form of a residential learning community where students are actually living in a dormitory and participating in learning activities outside of the classroom in their dormitory or in the community more broadly. But really importantly, that doesn't have to happen for a learning community to take place. And actually, in our toolkit for co-creative learning, we focus on what's called a classroom learning community. So these are taking place within an individual course. So students are broken up into smaller groups, and this is in order to facilitate exchange, perhaps also group work and group assessment or other forms of collaboration, but that's not necessary. But any kind of intentional creation of smaller groups within a class to facilitate exchange and learning can be a learning community. And what this does, or why you might want to implement a learning community, is that if done well, they kind of become an end in and of themselves. So if it's a true community, then students are supporting each other, interacting with each other, learning from each other. Faculty are learning from students and students from faculty. If there's a true community, then that is a real accomplishment and a real goal. So the ways, yeah, so the kinds of learning outcomes that you might expect from students are that they are learning how to engage with each other, to work together towards common goals, and also express their own learning and advocate for themselves. In a way, it's the heart of co-creation to take ownership and responsibility for your own learning in a community. So how can we do learning communities well? There are lots of ways to support and scaffold the contributions or interactions you want to happen in learning communities. And again, for the remainder of this presentation, it's focusing specifically on classroom learning communities. So these smaller groups within a larger class of students that have more of an interaction with each other. So we already saw lots of the ways that people are already supporting student work. So they might be using staff or student tutors for support. There should be clearly communicated learning objectives and expectations. And especially if you're going to be assessing group work, you may want to support students in particular ways that actually contribute to the project or the things that they're working on, whatever form of assessment. And some of the really practical ways you can do that are to assign easier or ungraded tasks or assignments early on in the semester, in the beginning of the semester. You may want to think about the different roles that students could play on a team and how they could divide labor and responsibility for the assessment for the project that they're creating. And you also might want to ask students to set group contracts to adjust their expectations, and so that there's clarity about how each student is participating in the team. But like we said, learning communities don't need to be oriented toward assessment. You can also provide expectations and for being socialized into university study. So you could make a guide for leading a discussion in a classroom or leading a discussion about a particular text. Some students, we often assume that they come to university with these skills, and that actually creates more anxiety sometimes among students that they should already know how to do these things, perhaps somehow naturally or magically. But oftentimes, if this is the first time they're doing it, structuring even those kinds of activities that we take for granted and providing support for those things can be a really nice way to facilitate even something as simple as discussion in a learning community. So now, again, we come to our concrete example. So the example I'm going to talk through is a course that I teach here at Leuphana University. It's called Collaborative Research Project. And this is a research-based learning course, which is nice that I talked about research-based learning first, in the individualized study program, the Studium Individuale. And in this course, students in small groups are designing and implementing an entire research project, from asking a very beginning question to selecting an appropriate method and conducting a literature review to actually collecting data or information and analyzing that information or data for findings and for conclusions. They're advanced students, but many of them have never done any kind of research before, and so they're nervous about it, or they don't know exactly what it's going to mean. And there's 2 or 3 faculty supervisors and a student tutor for support. And the way that the learning community works is that they form their own teams of 3 to 6 students, but they're supported in doing this by a survey at the very start of the semester, which asks them to identify their own experience with research as well as their interest in research. And that is used to create early discussion groups so students can kind of find each other, and then students are supported in helping themselves find teams or form teams based on those early discussions. And it's really important that the learning communities, these teams, these research teams that the students are working in, are supported, because nearly all aspects of the course and the assessment are collaborative. So the assignments, the presentation, and the final report are all done collaboratively in this group. And so to support that, we try to find lots of ways to foster a true learning community within these teams and also between the teams. So students are required not to have, not to attend lectures and not to do a set reading list, but rather the curriculum of the course is based on the kinds of projects that students are doing, the kinds of problems that they're encountering, and the kinds of discussions that happen in our class sessions. So the sessions are organized around the assignments that students are writing based on the current stage of the research process throughout the semester, and then the discussions that happen there are actually where students do the most learning and the most supporting of each other. So the ways that we support students in learning communities in this collaborative research project are some group communication workshops in the first month of the semester that focus on organization and communication. This involves talking with each other and running meetings, running team meetings, for example, but also very practical tools like online management forums or Kanban and techniques, or creating a Gantt chart for the timeline of your project. So these are different ways that we support students working in teams. We have a tutor, a student tutor, but who actually has some management experience, who is able to address team issues if and when they arise throughout the semester. If there's communication issues and they don't feel comfortable coming to a teacher about that, there's a student to sort of help address those issues, and the students know that they can go to the tutor for those things. And to try to prevent some forms of free riding in a team where one student maybe is not contributing as much, each time we meet throughout the semester, a different team member must act as the discussion lead. So the sessions are always based around the research as it's happening in each of these teams, and each member of the team has to act as a lead at least once throughout the semester. So they have to know what's going on with the research process. And finally, I think finally, these are all of my points, there's a self-reflection diary that encourages metacognition and self-awareness, both about the research process as well as the contribution that each person is making to the team. What is my role in this teamwork and in the research process? What kind of, what can I do going forward to contribute to my team and to support my team? So to create some awareness about working with others in a really clearly articulated way, and which is usually something that's glossed over in university study. Not often do we get the chance to think metacognitively about what it means to work like in a group. So this is just something that actually the student tutor had come up with this semester to show us the timeline, but I thought it might be nice to show you the different ways that we're supporting the learning communities. So we had the workshops at the beginning of the semester. These are workshops on communication and group work and organization and group work. And this semester, because we were all working remotely, there was also a general workshop about studying at home, which all students in the major were actually invited to, but this was a nice addition this semester. Like I said, there were team meeting or class meetings every 2 weeks in which we would discuss whatever issues were coming up in the teams about their research, the challenges they were facing, or the obstacles that came up. And like I said, before each meeting, a collective assignment was due to kind of give us the information, the topics that would be discussed in the class session. So now it's time for our discussion. To what extent do you incorporate small groups or team projects into your courses? And based on what you already do and what you maybe got some ideas about today, how do you support students in really productive communication and contribution to that teamwork? And how do you scaffold assignments and group work? Or if you're not using any kind of learning communities yet, how might you create learning communities in current or future courses?